In this chapter, we'll talk about connecting with the political process through interest groups and political parties. We'll be focusing on California specifically, the interest groups in California, and specifically how money plays a role in our system of government in California. Start with a definition of interest groups. They're organized groups of individuals sharing common policy objectives who actively attempt to influence policymakers. They normally do that through lobbyists. And a lobbyist is a group or organization who attempts to influence the passage, defeat, or content of legislation and the government's administrative decisions. Definition of political parties: groups of political activists who organize to win elections, operate the government, and determine public policy. Let's talk about the difference between political parties and interest groups. Political parties, as we mentioned, organize to win elections. They want to determine public policy and they want to operate government. On the other hand, interest groups do not want to operate the government, but they do support candidates who will promote their interests. Let's talk about the types of interest groups in California. The umbrella category of economic interest groups. First section of that, business. You see the California Chamber of Commerce and your local Chamber of Commerces. The agriculture groups, regional groups such as the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Another type of economic interest groups, California Medical Association, California Association of Realtors, California Teachers Association, California Faculty Association, California Correctional Peace Officers Association. All groups are professional associations made up by members of those groups and the unions, and they support their particular issues in the legislative process. We also have demographic groups. And those are groups that are based on characteristics that distinguish their members from other segments of the population. Their characteristics such as ethnicity, gender, age. Those are groups like United Farm Workers, National Organization for Women, the Equality California. That's a large group that works to elect gay legislators and obtain passage of equal rights legislation. And you also have the Campaign for California Families, which is in contrast to Equality California. The Campaign for California Families defines marriage as a union only between a man and a woman. You also have single-issue groups, such as the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. They evaluate candidates and ballot propositions solely in terms of whether their group's objective of no unnecessary taxes and no wasteful government spending are met. California Abortion Rights Action League, obviously single issue of abortion. Public interest groups such as Common Cause, League of Women Voters, and one particularly large is local governments, city and county governments. They're very organized. They bring a lot of resources to the table when dealing with the lobbying process and the interest group process. I want to take just a second and talk about an interest group that's left out of this process. And some have argued that our system of interest group politics leaves out poor Americans, people who typically do not join groups, and they may hold 2 or more jobs just to survive. Doesn't really leave them a lot of time to participate in the process. So some people feel a particular weakness of our system is that it leaves out the unorganized poor. So I mentioned environmental groups, Sierra Club, National Wildlife Federation. Again, public interest groups, local governments, League of California Cities, California School Boards Association, California State Association of Counties, and also groups such as the American Civil Liberties Union, Handgun Control, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, National Rifle Association. Let's talk for a second about what makes an interest group powerful. First, the size and the resources. You have a lot of members. A lot of members can translate into a strong financial base. Even if you have individual membership relatively small, that will provide an organization with a strong financial base. The leadership needs to be strong, and the cohesiveness of the organization needs to be strong. By cohesiveness, if your group's going to send letters to representatives, march on Washington or state capitals, or work together to defeat candidates, that can help make your group powerful. Now let's talk for just a few moments about how money plays a role in politics in California. We'll take a look at an analysis of more than 4 dozen lawmakers that was done by the Center for Investigative Reporting. And here are some of the things that they found, that how money entered the political process, the governing process in our state. For instance, $4.8 million total from healthcare interests, led by California Medical Association, California Dental Association. They were pushing, as it turns out unsuccessfully, to restore public health programs shuttered to save the state hundreds of millions of dollars. So this is a case where money doesn't always work. Put a lot of money into the process, unsuccessful in their efforts. Another case, $2.8 million from the state's building trades and construction unions. They were pushing hard for a controversial high-speed rail project, just the biggest public works project in state history and a prospective source of thousands of construction jobs. Another example, $1.8 million from Indian tribes and other gaming interests. These tribes successfully lobbied to block a bill to allow continued operation of a card club at Hollywood Racetrack. That would have been a competitor to the casinos. $1.5 million from public employee unions, led by the International Association of Firefighters. These unions lined up to ease the impact of Governor Brown's public pension cuts, and those cuts were intended to save the California Public Employees Retirement System pension fund billions of dollars. One more example, a little more than $1 million from the California Teachers Association and other school employee unions. These unions were lobbying to preserve pensions and education funding, and the Teachers Association lobbied to kill a measure that would have made it easier for school districts to fire bad teachers, and those efforts continue today. And final example, $1.4 million from telecommunications companies, most of it from AT&T, Time Warner, and Verizon. And those companies won passage of a law that blocks the California Public Utilities Commission from regulating internet phone calls. So those are just some examples of how money enters our process and the role that it plays in our system of governing in California. Finally, I'm going to talk about the concepts that you'll need to know for the quiz. Again, all the answers to these questions can be found in the text. You also want to see the PowerPoint slides that were provided for the text, and you'll find them under course documents. First concept, how does a political party differ from an interest group? You'll need to know the definition of lobbyist. You need to know the definition of social movement. Which group is generally left out of interest group politics? We talked about that a little earlier in this lecture. What is the key to success for interest groups? Interest groups recognize what is the greatest concern to legislators. What are legislators most concerned about as they deal with interest groups? Why do interest groups try to generate public pressure? You want to know what the definition of realignment is. Definition of realignment is as it relates to government. What is divided government? And what is the trend for the number of voters who identify themselves as independent? Are those numbers staying about the same? Are they growing? Are they growing to the point where they're almost at a record high? So understand those concepts as you prepare for your quiz, and good luck.